Welcome to What Are We Thinking? A trip into the right hemisphere of the human brain. I'm Doug Runthy, your host. My cohort Ron Van Wormer off to the side to make sure things go relatively smoothly. And our featured guest, we're really looking forward to talking to. Bill Harvey is a world-renowned media researcher who's on more than one occasion changed the course of media history. He's also the founder of the Human Effectiveness Institute, which focuses on higher and more effective states of consciousness. What a perfect way to get into the right hemisphere. He's also the author of one of our favorite books, Mind Magic: Doorways into Higher Consciousness. Bill, great to see you.
Great to see you. It's been too long.
It's been a while, but I know we've been thinking along the same lines. And let's talk about what most people would refer to as intuition. You call it the flow state. Could you describe the flow state and then your first experience with it?
Sure. The term, the flow state, was coined by Csikszentmihalyi, who coined that word when he was running the psychology department at the University of Chicago. And he tried out many of his theories about the flow state with Chicago's hockey team, moving them from losers into winners. Anyway, the nature of the flow state, as he defines it, is that it's an autotelic experience. It's something, you're doing something for fun, for play, and not for an outcome. And you're not anxious about the outcome. And you slip into the state where you're kind of watching yourself do it, as if watching a movie, and it's perfect. It's unfolding perfectly. You see performance that you didn't think you were capable of achieving, and you're sustaining it right up until it grabs your ego and pulls you down out of it. But experience with that, long before I knew what label to put on it, was I was 4 years old. A year or two earlier, I had been on stage for the first time, but I had no speaking lines. My father was carrying me on stage when I was like 2 years old, 3 years old. I think I got to say hello into the microphone. Don't remember that. But when I was 4, they started to put me on stage singing and doing stand-up comedy with my father at the Hotel Brickman in the Catskill Mountains of the Borscht Belt. And that went on for some years and morphed into my becoming more of a dancer than a singer or comic. And initially, my reaction to this was terrible stage fright. And after a while, I robotically got my lines straight, and they kind of started to come out by rote, by themselves. And then one night in a performance, where I guess I was feeling relaxed for the first time, all of a sudden, in the middle of the act, I'm not in my body. I'm up above and behind in the air, looking down at myself. And I'm doing the best performance I've ever done, getting laugh after laugh. My timing was impeccable. As if synchronistically, the house photographer came alongside the stage and was looking up to get a shot, and I hammed it up, hesitating in the middle of a sentence to smile at him, breaking my father up. Anyway, after that, there were more and more such experiences on stage. And I didn't know how to explain this to anyone, my father, my mother, or anyone else. Years later, when I started to talk about it with performers, professional performers, they would say, like Jack Carter said, "Oh, Bill, we all get that. That's called being on." So that was my first label that I was able to put on it. And then I read about the scientists having a eureka moment, and athletes being in the zone. And I realized these were all the same thing. And I used those words interchangeably until I found the flow state label, and then I started to use that. That was much, much later. But I was fascinated by the fact that there was this other state of consciousness. And I wanted to always be there. I wanted to figure out, how do I get back into that state? Because I'm much better in that state. I feel great. I don't make mistakes, and I'm having a good time, and it's doing itself. How do I stay in that? How do I get back into and stay when I'm not on stage? Whenever I wanted to be able to do it. So I began to pay attention to my mind and watch my mind. I didn't realize I was meditating. I may not have known the word meditate at the time, I'm not sure, but I was meditating, watching the mutations of my mind from moment to moment, watching how a thought arose or a feeling arose or an image arose, which led to which, what kinds of emotions came from that image, why did that happen? So I later coined the term observer state. I believe that the doorway state into the flow state is the observer state, that it's a prerequisite, and that that's why meditators report the flow state experiences much more than non-meditators do. So rather than just keep talking for the 30 minutes, I think I'll stop. And
Well, no, that's you were in the flow. I want to see, it's interesting. We talk a lot about the distinction between the left and right hemispheres, both of which are very important. Real quick summary, our brains are divided into two hemispheres, among other things, divided by a corpus callosum, which is a very thick fiber of nerves through which the two hemispheres can communicate, but they often don't unless we come in as the observer and make sure they communicate. Because the left hemisphere, where our culture and therefore most people individually spend most of their attention, is very good at focus. It's very good at picking out individual trees. It's very good at following a clear set of rules and come to a clear conclusion. But we can't see the forest for the trees. The left hemisphere can only deal with situations where it feels it's certain it can get a really clear answer. The right hemisphere, which physiologically is larger, has more wiring, is capable of imagination. It's open to answers that may come from unusual or not clear places. Your description of the flow state is much more a right hemisphere phenomenon than a left. And so I wanted to get into what this observer is like, because we all know what it is to be an observer. We're all observing every day, but you're talking about the observer at a different level. I would say in a right hemisphere level, where consciously and or unconsciously, the mind is letting go of the need to be certain and is allowing larger levels of reality to enter without a clear rational understanding of it, but knowing, as you knew after your experience at 4 years old, that if you were willing to allow all that extra information to come in, you would actually be working at a higher level, even though a less rational level. So that was my attempt to try to continue the conversation. So why don't you take it off from there?
The experience we all have of having hunches. The word hunch is kind of a cultural deprecation of the word intuition. Both describing the same things, but with different levels of respect. So we tend to consider our hunches to be something that we don't expect to be accurate. And the thing is, most of us aren't statisticians or scientists, so we don't realize how implausible it is that we don't keep track of and notice and appreciate, and we're not amazed at the many times our hunches are right. It's improbable that they would be right by accident that many times, but we're non-statisticians and non-scientists, so that never occurs to most of us. You know, as you were saying, the left brain is specialized in stepwise cognition. You know, one step leads to another step, syllogisms, logic, etc. Um, the right brain, one of the many wonderful things, and you've named some of them already, that the right brain does is spontaneous, holistic cognition. It doesn't follow the step by step. Sometimes you get a very strong cognition or hunch, um, and you can't explain where it came from. Um, and yet you have a strong gut feeling that it's accurate. Some research work that I've done in terms of the brain lead me to believe that not only is the right brain implicated in those cases, but also, but regardless of where it is structurally, I'm more interested in the functional side than the structural side. Obviously, the brain has a lot of plasticity, and if you have half your brain blown away, the other half seems to be able to pick up the pieces and do some of those other functions. And we've known that for decades and decades, back to World War I. But at any rate, all of a sudden, the right brain is capable of putting together and coming up with a hypothesis which strongly resonates with the gut feeling, which, according to Daniel Goleman, is mediated by the cerebellum, that gut feeling. At any rate, so out of nowhere, this idea pops into your head and it's full blown, and you don't see the step by step. And if you're a person like me, who's probably on a Myers-Briggs scale, more of the intuition type than any of the other types, somebody asks you, well, why do you say that? I find it sometimes hard to answer that question. If it's popped hole into my head, I don't know why I said that. I know there was some string of processing that went on in the subconscious. I believe that a large part of the right brain is synonymous to what we call the subconscious. Jerry Zoltman from Harvard in 2005 came out with a book which said, based on his work in neuroscience, 95% of decision making is subconscious. And when we do market research surveys, asking questions, we're addressing the verbal part of the mind, which is only making, according to his research, only 5% of the decisions. So we need to go beyond asking questions of the verbal mind. We'll get answers. People will give us answers if we only talk to the verbal mind, but we're not tapping into the part of the mind that's making most of the decisions in life.
You know, to pick up on that, we now know from neurobiology, EEGs, MRIs, et cetera, we can actually investigate the brain, that the information that comes from the unconscious, subconscious region first enters the right hemisphere of the brain, particularly through dreams, intuitions. It then immediately gets passed to the left hemisphere, which processes it, does its thing. But if it doesn't hand back the material to the right hemisphere, which it typically won't unless we train ourselves to do that, it will dismiss most of it, because the left hemisphere is excellent at logic, sequence, and figuring out more about areas that we are certain we can figure things out in. But by definition, Carl Jung, maybe not considered the greatest psychologist, certainly the most influential psychologist of the 20th century, famously said, the challenge of the unconscious is it's unconscious. Okay. So how do we, it's almost like a Zen koan, how do we then consciously access ourselves to that reservoir of information from the unconscious? And one reason we don't is because we're scared of that information. It's dark. Some of it is quite frightening. Some of it is very irrational. The left part of our brain does not want to deal with most of it. So there's where the training comes in. Now, you were fortunate. I was fortunate. I also at 4, 5, 6 can remember experiences that I now know were very totally intuitive. And because they worked out, I was open to it. But these are things that can be trained. We don't have to wait. And the reason I know you know this is because you developed the Human Effectiveness Institute, which studies these things. So let's get into a little more of the specifics. For someone watching our webinar right now, what are some of the methods, let's call them tricks, if you will, for training the right hemisphere of our brain to access more of that unconscious information, which is so valuable if we bring it to the light of consciousness?
Well, Mind Magic describes a couple that I can think of right off the bat, one of which was one of your favorites years ago. Before I get to that one, though, Mind Magic says that essentially the left brain has already bought into the materialist accidentalism explanation for what the world is, which is tied to our culture. And so it won't look at your own experience through any other lens. And any other things that pop into your head won't get your attention. So in order to get around that, whatever words you find yourself thinking in your mind about a situation, like if there's somebody speaking in a room who seems to be hypnotizing everyone, let yourself entertain that as an explanation, as a model. Don't take it off the table of your mind. If you see people manipulating each other, if when you're giving somebody a massage, you sense you're getting feedback from the body as its own mind, and those the cellular mind is programming your fingers, don't cast those thoughts aside. Leave them in your mind right alongside the other more logical thoughts that you might have. The one that used to be one of your favorites was essentially, remember the kids' game Freeze, where you don't move anything, including your balls? And in Mind Magic, it says, do not move, but watch yourself not complete the intended action. In other words, if you have a desire to scratch an itch, don't do it. Just notice that you're not doing it. See what happens, see what goes on next. That gets you right into the observer state. Once you stop moving around, because otherwise we have these spontaneous movements. We're bouncing off the walls all the time. If I may take a slight detour here, I've got a theory as to why the culture is the culture. Why it is a left brain culture. How did we get to a left brain culture? Well, as you've already said, the left brain, there are two particular areas in the left brain that have to do with language. Broca's area, which encodes outgoing language, things we say, or things we say in our mind to ourselves, involves, I call it the worder, but it's Broca's area. And then there's Wernicke's area, which processes the incoming language and turns it into meaning. So you've got this concentration of language skill mediation in the left brain. And I believe that when language became written language, that about 10,000 years ago, that created a shock. First of all, the brain as it is right now is only 200,000 years old. That's not a long time when you consider how long it takes, the species like human beings, hundreds of millions of years, mammals develop and so on and so forth. All of a sudden, 200,000 years, the physical brain is what it is. I see where we are now as a shock reaction to that brain and its capabilities, which was further exacerbated with written language, because language, which was already powerful, kind of in a magical way, we were already using kind of grunt language to coordinate hunts where we could actually take over larger predators and cooperate by the use of oral language. So it was incredibly powerful even before it was written. But when it became written, 70% of our energy is consumed through our eyes. We are visually dominant as a species. Dolphins are auditory. Canines and felines are olfactory. We are visual. So all of a sudden you have this powerful, magical thing called language. It now all of a sudden moves into our main sensory system. I believe that started an acceleration, and the acceleration led to tools, weapons, and media, each of which further accelerated the culture to the point where in 1975 I wrote, I started to use the word acceleritis. In 1975, I started to write that we've been taken over, hypnotized by the environment around us, and media being a large part of that. That was before the internet. Now, today with the internet, we have everything we had in 1975. We spend just as much time, actually a little more on television than we did then. But now we have on top of that the hours of additional use of the internet. So all of that creates a situation. I believe the observer state and the flow state are our natural state. If it wasn't for the acceleration that occurred, we would live in that state all the time with full access to our right brain and our intuition. But it's closed off by the fact that we are in emergency oversimplification procedure, EOP. You'll recognize that out of Mind Magic. EOP is actually, in most cases, a weak, but nowadays not necessarily weaker, form of post-traumatic stress disorder. The whole human race has post-traumatic stress disorder. It's EOP. Most of our time is spent in EOP. And what that does is it loses the magic of life, the sense of awe and fascination with life. It's magic, it's numinosity. It makes us look at everything as a threat. And the more extreme EOP gets and turns into literally post-traumatic stress disorder, as it would be medically diagnosed, we more and more see everything that's happening to us as a threat. And we lose the ability to see ourselves, to be in the observer state. All of a sudden, the endless talk in our mind becomes what we identify as our self. Our total self is dwarfed into that one part of us. And so we no longer can observe our thought and say, wait, that's not right. That doesn't jive with this experience. What's your evidence for that? Where did that come from? That's the observer state. That's how we know we're out of EOP for a moment. So that's my theory.
Now, EOP, I got emergency oversimplification, and P is for?
Procedure.
Procedure. Okay. I like the language because it is purposely emotive. It's like an alarm going off. And I couldn't agree with you more. I would describe the same thing you're saying in terms of brainwave states. And this is now hard science that the left hemisphere can agree with, which is most of the time we're in the beta state. That's when our brainwaves are oscillating at their fastest speed. It's our everyday experience. It's part of evolutionary's tool. We need it, for example, if we're driving and a truck is bearing down on us and we need to get out of the way, right? We need to move. We need that adrenaline rush. We need to see that as a threat, okay? Just as our ancestors saw a saber-toothed tiger as a threat. As I hear you, and I've heard other experts who agree with you, is we've gotten to a point where we've lost our way, and things which are not actually threatening appear as threatening because our brains are always in that beta fast state. We've all experienced the slowing down of the brain waves into what's called the alpha state. That's the flow state. That's where intuition can start to do its magic. We are very capable in slowing down our brainwave states. It's not that difficult. I learned it first consciously when I was 25 and just took a course for fun in self-hypnosis. And within 2 weeks, the teacher had us putting ourselves in hypnotic states and relishing and dealing with the alpha state. It took 2 weeks of maybe 10 minutes a day practice. So these are things that can be done relatively simply because they're natural to us, but we've lost them. We've lost our way. And I love your, what's that, acceleritis you talked? It sounds like
Yes.
a foot powder for it. What is it? What did you call it?
Acceleritis.
Our brains are in beta all the time. We need to bring them down to alpha. When we sleep, and we know from brain research, from sleep research, that if we were awakened every night, every time we went into rapid eye movement to dream, we would be in an insane institution within a week or two. That's the slowest brainwave state, when we're literally unconscious all the time. That's delta. Theta is to me the most interesting brainwave state. It's slower than alpha, but faster. That's our dream state. When we're dreaming, right, we're asleep yet conscious of something going on. These are states we can train ourselves to get more into. And it's not just philosophers and yogis and Buddhist teachers who teach us to get into the flow state. You mentioned the hockey team. Michael Jordan talked about it. He was asked once, how can it be that with all the pressure of the game on the line, you demanding the ball, you've got the ball, you need to make the shot. How is it you look so cool? And Michael Jordan, who I'm just guessing did not study a lot of, philosophy and brain research, said, when everyone else is stressed out and their brains are overly excited, I can slow everything down. I literally slow the game down. He's not saying he's not only slowing down his brain waves, but his brain waves, according to Michael Jordan, is slowing everyone else down. Now, we know that may not be true physically, but literally he is in a state where everything is happening more slowly and he can see what's happening before everybody else can. Okay?
That is flow state.
Flow state.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's a very mystical, magical state. On the other hand, it's a very practical, doable state. Now, getting into a little different, a statement you made in one of your blogs, which I like. Philosophy is the practice of reevaluating our foundational beliefs. Okay. Now here we come head on with acceleritis and emergency oversimplification procedure. Because if we're not observing ourselves, when our beliefs are challenged, just open the newspaper every day or turn on the TV news. Anytime our beliefs are challenged, we go berserk. And we may go berserk quietly, or we may go berserk in a very loud way, like happened in the Capitol a few months ago. It's our job as individuals. The culture is not going to teach us to slow down. Our educational system is as stuck in acceleritis as anything else. This is up to us to do. And I believe firmly that the World Wide Web, with all of its noise, all of its fake news, all of its acceleritis, and in fact, it has a natural acceleritis because the World Wide Web is generated by computer intelligence, which is operating at a faster speed than our brain. So when we are on the screen together and everyone watching us, right? Our brains are being asked to move a little faster because the computer behind it is moving faster. But we don't have to follow suit. We can slow the brain waves down, become more of the observer. If we don't, the World Wide Web is going to lead us to mass anxiety. If enough of us do, this is my theory, we will bring about the next renaissance. I firmly believe both are going to happen. I believe because of the World Wide Web right now, and you're the media expert, you've helped revolutionize media. And people who want to know more about that, you can give us a website for that part of your business. But I would love your take on where this World Wide Web that we have, to me, is it's Indira's net from the Hindu philosophy. This is quantum entanglement live at our screens, everything connected. But it's up to us as individuals and then as collaborators to utilize this amazing tool that's connecting our brains more to the flow state than to the acceleration state, because mass anxiety is on its way if we don't really take a handle on this thing. Your thoughts?
Totally with you. I already call it mass hysteria that tens of millions of people still believe the election was fixed, I think it qualifies by the scientific definition of mass hysteria. You know, when you practice this, slowing down, which, you know, breathing, meditation, freezing in place, opening your mind, reopening your mind to all possibilities, removing for a moment experimentally, while you're in that state, removing the things that have been your beliefs. I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. Just experimentally remove them, set them aside for a moment. Learn to tolerate being open to their removal, and to start from scratch and see whether your experience leads you back into reifying them all over again, or maybe considering a whole start from scratch position. But at any rate, what I find in these moments of use of the right brain, the whole brain really, not excluding the right brain, bringing in more balance, that I get more flashes of inspiration, more spontaneous cognitions, more inspirations, hunches, whatever you want to call it, when whatever I'm thinking suspends all negativity, when I won't allow negativity in. And I'll relax any other part that's necessary. If I have an attachment to something, I relax that experimentally in my brain. It's not going to do any harm. I can always bring back that I need it, but let's just set it aside from now. Let's start from scratch. Let's say nothing's important. Let's just consider everything that's I want to think about, or that I find myself thinking about, with an open mind. Reopen the mind to all possibilities, and don't be negative. That's when I get the greatest flow of new, useful ideas. And so I notice from that what the brain is doing, what the universe is doing, is it's rewarding activity which is more constructive for not only myself, but for everyone else. So unselfish behavior is rewarded by the universe, and it comes through with flow state as the reward that you get when you think about the good of a situation from the standpoint of all concerned, rather than your own fixed beliefs from before. So there's many ways of scientifically, theoretically hypothesizing why that is the case. Why does it seem to be that the universe is reinforcing acting with a concern for oneself and others? Well, maybe because, as Jung said, all our consciousnesses are connected. Even more than that, in my theory, everything in the universe is one consciousness. Each of us is that one self who's like a master video games player and has all these avatars. Looking at the eyes of each avatar, but having infinite attention, that being is able to live through all of us. And that is my conception of the universe, but it's all happening in consciousness. And consciousness then, in what we perceive as the material world, differentiates itself into many different kinds of matter and energy, but all of it is actually underneath one self, one consciousness. And therefore, of course, it wants to reinforce behavior that's good for the whole, not just for parts of the whole.
You know, it's interesting. I just recently saw a YouTube talk by an anesthesiologist who said almost what you said, but from a more scientific viewpoint. So we can get at this from point. The thing that I'm remembering most right now from this conversation, I love that you brought up the freeze game, because again, the left brain, very valuable for certain things, tends to say, oh, so what you're telling me is I got to learn formal meditation. No, that's one way. If that's the way you choose and that works for you, great. Be as formal with your meditation and be as specific as you can. But the flow state can be arrived at by playing a mental version of a kid's game called freeze. This is a natural ability that we have lost. We don't have time today, but Marshall McLuhan agrees with you, and Plato agrees with you, that as brilliant as written language has been and is important, it's also blinded us to nonverbal communication, which is well over 95% of the way we communicate. So lots of food for thought, no surprise. That's why we love talking with you. Look forward to doing it again. For people who want to pursue more deeply some of the insights that you have, tell us about the book Mind Magic, the Human Effectiveness Institute, and your blog.
The Human Effectiveness Institute is www.humaneffectivenessinstitute.org. My blog is www.billharveyblog.com. And the thought I'd like to leave us with today relates to my book, You Are the Universe. You Are the Universe is more about cultivating telepathic precognitive abilities. So I think it bears looking at. You Are the Universe, Bill Harvey. It's on Amazon, easy enough to find.
And we'll put links on our website.
Yeah. The thought I'd like to leave us with comes really out of You Are the Universe, is when we go into emergency oversimplification procedure, PTSD, and we lose the ability to see ourselves. What's really important there is when we do see ourselves, we realize we have a mission. When we do see ourselves, we have a sense of purpose in life. We remember what our original dreams were. Really what I believe propelled us to take form in this life as we are taking. It was all from a given dharma or purpose, a vision we had of what we wanted to do in this life. When we can't see ourselves, we can't pursue our dharma. And so we waste time. We indulge in activities. We use media frivolously. When we remember ourselves, we can still use media, but we're much more serious about our use of time because we have a purpose, we have a target, we have a goal. We want to go to a certain place in our lives. We want to get there. So we would use the internet, for example, more for research related to our true purpose in life. So I'd like to leave us with that thought.
Well, we appreciate it. Bill Harvey, Mind Magic, the Human Effectiveness Institute, You Are the Universe. And you're a great guy to talk to, and we always appreciate it. It was great to connect again, and we'll stay in touch.
Takes one to know one.
Be well.